Thank you, Carolyn and Kevin, for beautiful music this morning. As always, we so appreciate the preludes that you give us every Sunday. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, and welcome to our online service for the Unitarian Church of Staten Island. Welcome from the comfort of your homes, from wherever you are, and however you are feeling. Maybe like me, there's lots of snow falling outside, and you're ready to cozy up and stay inside this morning. Welcome into this virtual space. I hope you find a way to get comfortable in your body, to rest and relax wherever you are, and enter into this time of community and connection. I'm the Reverend Emily D. Tarbert, pronouns she, her, hers, and I'm speaking live from my apartment here in Marble Hill, Manhattan. Grateful to be with you all this morning. I open our service with words by Anne Frank this morning. I can feel the suffering of millions. And yet, if I look up into the heavens, I think it will all come right. And that this cruelty too will end. And that peace and tranquility will return again. In the meantime, I must uphold my ideals, for perhaps the time will come when I shall be able to carry them out. With that, let us begin our service this morning. This morning, I will light our chalice this morning, and I invite you, if you know the chalice lighting words, which we don't have in the chat, but if you know of them or if you hear them and want to repeat them, please do. We light this chalice in the search for truth and the spirit of love. We unite in worship and fellowship. Now, as we've been doing for many months, we have an extension to our chalice lighting. I'd like to take a moment of silence to light these candles for some of the names of those who've been recently affected by police brutality. We know that we cannot cover all the names of those who are affected. We light a candle for the life of Frederick Cox, for the life of Xavier Hill, and for the life of Patrick Warren Sr. May these lights be a symbol of our commitment to continue the work of racial justice and to proclaim that indeed Black lives matter. And now I invite us all to sing along with our first hymn. I will share the lyrics on the screen as Kevin and Carolyn sing the words. We will be singing Answering the Call of Love. Give me a moment to get the lyrics on the screen for you all. Thanks for your patience. Let's go ahead and sing Answering the Call of Love.
The promise of the Spirit, faith, hope, and love abide. And so every soul is blessed and made whole. The truth of our hearts is our guide. We are answering the call of love. Hands joined together as hearts beat as one. Emboldened by faith, we dare to proclaim. We are answering the call of love. Oh, hang on. To build a barrier answering the call of love. And joined together as hearts beat as one, embracing by faith, we dare to proclaim, we are answering the call of love. A bright new day is dawning, when love will not divide. Reflections of grace in every embrace, fulfilling the vision divine. We are answering the call of love, and joined together as hearts beat as one, emboldened by faith, we dare to proclaim, we are answering the call of love. We are answering the call of love.
Thank you, Kevin and Carolyn. Thank you. And now it is time in our service for joys and sorrows. We invite you, if you feel so moved, to share in one of two ways. You can chat in the chat box what's on your heart this morning, or feel free to unmute yourself or raise your hand and we'll call on you. Now is a time for us to share what's on our hearts with each other. Many of your faces, we have quite the crowd this morning. It's so great to have you with us. I'm so grateful for this time we get to share together. Let us enter into a moment of meditation and reflection this morning. O Spirit of life and greater love, we are grateful to be with each other this morning, to share what's on our hearts, or to have just a moment of silent reflection. We are grateful for the joys in our world, everything from the beautiful snow to beautiful new life among us. And we are thinking of those in our community that continue to need our support and outreach. Those who are sick and are continuing to grow towards healing. Those who are continuing to deal with the effects of this pandemic and the world around us. There's so much both to be grateful for and so much pain and sorrow among us as well. For all of these things, for everything that is the human life, we offer it up to this community and into the mystery and grace that is life itself. For all these things we say, Amen. Thank you, everyone. And now, as we transition to our service, I invite Jennifer Hyman to share our reading this morning.
Good morning to you, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. I will be reading you some excerpts from The Case for Reparations by Ta-Nehisi Coates. We must imagine a new country. Reparations, by which I mean the full acceptance of our collective biography and its consequences, is the price we must pay to see ourselves squarely. The recovering alcoholic may well have to live with his illness for the rest of his life, but at least he is not living a drunken lie. Reparations beckons us to reject the intoxication of hubris and see America as it is, the work of fallible humans. Won't reparations divide us? Not any more than we are already divided. The wealth gap merely puts a number on something we feel but cannot say, that American prosperity was ill-gotten and selective in its distribution. What is needed is an airing of family secrets, a settling with old ghosts. What is needed is a healing of the American psyche and the banishment of white guilt. What I'm talking about is more than recompense for past injustices, more than a handout, a payoff, hush money, or a reluctant bribe. What I'm talking about is a national reckoning that would lead to spiritual renewal. Reparations would mean the end of scarfing hot dogs on the 4th of July while denying the facts of our heritage. Reparations would mean the end of yelling patriotism while waving a Confederate flag. Reparations would mean a revolution of the American consciousness, a reconciling of our self-image as the great democratizer with the facts of our history. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jennifer, for those words. And I'm so grateful you said yes when I asked for a reader for this text this morning. Everyone, I've been struggling with something in this last month, especially when it comes to dialogue on the national stage and when it comes to the aftermath of the insurrection. There seems to be an echo in our national politics from particular political leaders to essentially move on. To acknowledge we have a new administration, we have a new staff. Why should we call for impeachment? Why should we linger on hurt? You just move towards working together in unity, right? We just look to the future. Forget about the past. This message is something I've heard many times over the years of my lifetime in different messaging across my life. To, well, get over it, essentially. In my life, I've been told to get thicker skin and to just leave it behind, from everything from sexist comments to questionable encounters with men to homophobic interactions with others. And now for me, as a white woman, that's small little encounters across my life. Imagine for just a moment, imagine over 400 years of generations after generations after generations of Black and Indigenous people of color being told by white people in power in this country to, well, essentially get over it. And maybe then we can scratch the surface of the true history of America. As we begin to think about Black history in this month of February, I know that knowing our history and learning of the past informs our present. When we take stock for a moment of just the magnitude of the legacies of slavery and racism in our country and our history, we see the chasm of so much harm that has been left to fester without much, if any, acknowledgement. After this year, the deaths of those like George Floyd and others, there's a shift in the national conversation about racism. The country has started to move in conversations of anti-racism and to address white supremacy culture, understanding the legacies of racism we inhabit and perpetuate. There are beginning to be real conversations of what it is like to move forward in strategic anti-racist ways. But there can be no moving forward without an attempt to recognize and deal with the hurts of the past. Real repair, real relationship and healing comes from accountability, recompense, and then maybe reconciliation if possible. I'm talking about reparations. Upon preparing for this sermon, I quickly realized just how out of my depth I am to try and preach about reparations to all of you. Both when it comes to my identity as a white person of privilege, but also when it comes to the long history and legacies of this text, which is why most of my sermon will be sharing the words of others who are wiser than me, like Ta-Nehisi Coates, or those who did the Commission on Institutional Change, Widening the Circle of Concern. Let me make it clear that as a person of white privilege, it is not my right or ability to tell anyone how to repair hurts or trauma of the past, and that is not what the sermon is trying to do. I come here with absolutely no answers and not even a direction. I just have a question that is sitting on my soul and on my heart. I want to start having this dialogue with us as a congregation, with American citizens as a nation. I want us to sit with the question, what does truly accounting for our legacies of slavery, genocide, and racism look like? To just sit with that question. And the wild thing is, the question itself, even starting the conversation, has sat on our Congress's doorstep for over 30 years. Bill H.R. 40, which is a bill to establish a commission to study and develop reparation proposals for African Americans, was introduced to Congress in 1989. It was reintroduced in January of 2019 and had its first hearing to even consider whether it would be a bill on June 19, 2019. I'm grateful that it's gotten more attention over the past year, but it still hasn't been voted on. And again, this bill doesn't have any money, it doesn't have any instructions. It's simply a bill to start the conversation, to create a commission to study the issue. And there's so much resistance to even open the conversation. Even when I think about bringing up the word reparations, it seems to have immediate backlash. For some, when you mention the word reparations, it seems to be a new idea that's been radicalized by our recent political arena. But as Ta-Nehisi Coates writes, reparations is certainly not a new idea. In America, it's at least as old as slavery itself. I'll quote from the article, The Case for Reparations. Quote, as a historian Roy E. Finkbein has documented, at the dawn of this country, Black reparations were actively considered and often effected. Quakers in New York, New England, and Baltimore went so far as to make membership contingent upon compensating one's former slaves. In 1782, the Quaker Robert Pleasance emancipated his 78 slaves, granted them 350 acres, and later built a school on their property and provided for their education. Quote, the doing of this justice to the injured Africans, wrote Pleasance, would be an acceptable offering to him who, quote, rules in the kingdom of men, end quote. In other words, a justice towards God. The idea of repaying full damages done for past harm has been part of the conversation in our country for centuries, and its loudest proponents have been people of faith. People of faith who recognize that justice means true accountability and recompense. Now, in our modern conversation of reparations, it seems to some like some impossible pipe dream, the magnitude which is hard to even fathom. But as Ta-Nehisi Coates writes, it isn't impossible, and it's necessary. As we heard Jennifer share, and I'll quote again, quote, reparations, by which I mean the full acceptance of our collective biography and its consequences, is the price we must pay to see ourselves squarely. As he says, what I'm talking about is a national reckoning that would lead to a spiritual renewal. Reparations would mean a revolution of the American consciousness, a reconciling of our self-image as the great democratizer with facts of our history. From a faith perspective, especially Unitarian Universalist faith perspective, this makes sense. We sing in our hymns, we say to each other, a light of truth. We hold up the search for truth. And no healing can be done until the truth is faced, without fully acknowledging the reality of the harm done, accounting for that harm, and giving some kind of change and recompense that opens the path to healing. And it would seem that our Unitarian Universalist Association would agree, especially the leaders from the recent Commission on Institutional Change. In the latest report, Widening Our Circle of Concern, the Commission on Institutional Change specifically looks at the ways our denomination systems and structures perpetuate racism. It examines how we as a denomination could better live into our vision of a truly multicultural, diverse, and anti-racist faith. Within the report, they talk about restoration and repair and the importance of reparations. And I will quote, Quote, while we work toward a total liberation for all, we must acknowledge the hurts that can be healed, the faults that can be fixed, and the repair possible among communities suffering from the material outcomes of hundreds of years of oppression. Quote, surely, if our first principle is to be believed, those captive people had worth and dignity. Although their dignity was assailed, it was not degraded or diminished, and we should not disregard it now. And when we respect their inherent worth and dignity, we must conclude that they deserve what justice this generation is able to afford their memories. End quote. In this report lies a call from leaders of color in our faith to examine the ways our own UU institutions have perpetuated harm to oppressed communities, and to start the conversation of what real repair could look like. But beyond posing the question, there's already an example of at least a first attempt at our denomination to try to scratch the surface of reparations. And for this, I look towards the promise of the $5 million to Black Lives and Unitarian Universalists. The amount of $5 million is specifically in our denomination's history to rectify the harm that was done when the UUA in 1968 promised $1 million to a Black Affairs Council but never actually gave them that money. This would lead to the Black empowerment controversy that would leave countless Black Unitarians and Universalists to leave our denomination. While this new funding will never make up for the many Black Unitarian Universalists and humanists who ended up leaving our movement, for the communities that were harmed by our past inactions and systems of racism, this funding has ensured a future where Black Lives of Unitarian Universalists will thrive and be funded for years to come. This is in no means any kind of perfect example, but it is an example of an attempt to figure out what to do. With these examples, our faith movement is making a brave call for all of the members of Unitarian Universalism to reflect on what real repair is. And when I think specifically of our community, the Unitarian Church of Staten Island, this ask makes sense given our history. We are a community that rests on a unique history, a unique abolitionist history, the history of forebears like Curtis's and Shaw's. Our steeple was not just a beacon of liberal religion, it was literally a light and a stop on the Underground Railroad. And for that history, for us to be accountable to that vision of our forebears, not to say they weren't problematic, but to live into the best of our ideals, we must continue to have the conversation of what it means to repair the legacy of harm that slavery and racism has done to our country, so that we may continue to live into that vision of freedom our congregation was quite literally founded on. So again, I ask you, I feel like this whole sermon has been an entreat to just hold the question. What does true accountability for the past look like? What does true healing look like? What does reparations look like on a national scale or even a local one? I find it important to just sit with the question, to prepare ourselves to really face this history, because the history is our living present. I did not bring up the insurrection just to be an example. It is the living, breathing history of the ghosts of our past coming to meet us. And if we cannot face the true legacy of slavery and genocide of our past, if it goes unaddressed, our country will continue to have the vestiges of white supremacy in our healthcare, in our economy, in our politics, all of which culminated and festered to create the political divisions we now live with and witness today. The events of the insurrection have everything to do with a direct line of history towards slavery. of who is seen as human, who is seen as who has the power to give a right voice in politics. And as we continue to witness our own economic issues in this country, there is a direct line from centuries of the wealth gap to communities of color, or right now, the particular devastation of COVID to Black, Indigenous, and people of color, to that history. As we heard Ta-Nehisi Coates say, quote, "What is needed is an airing of the family secrets, a settling with old ghosts," end quote. We are dealing with those ghosts right here. Ghosts we have not as a country laid to rest. So I truly do hope that this country, that all of us who live in it, have the courage to face those ghosts among us, to have that conversation so that someday, maybe someday, we can actually lay the ghosts to rest once and for all. May it be so. And amen. Now is the time in this service where I invite you to our offertory. Give me one moment. We know it is the many gifts of this congregation and of our members that keeps our services going, including these virtual services. So please, if you are willing and able, give as generously as you can. And thank you for all the ways you support this community as we continue to embody and live and sit with the things that make us the community of justice we are called to be. I invite you to watch this beautiful song by Dr. Glenn Thomas Rideout, an amazing musician who will sing for us our offertory this morning. Give as generously as you can. Thank you.
Circle round for freedom, circle round for peace, for all of us imprisoned, circle for release, circle for the planet, circle for its soul, for the children of our children. Keep the circle whole. Circle round for freedom. Circle round for peace, for all of us imprisoned. Circle for release. Circle for the planet. Circle for its soul, for the children of our children. Keep the circle whole. Circle round for freedom. Circle round for peace, for all of us imprisoned. Circle for release. Keep the circle whole.
And now we invite you to sing our closing hymn, We Would Be One. I will share the lyrics on our screen as wonderful Kevin Clark and Carolyn Clark sing along. Please stay muted so you can sing along from home.
We would be one as now we join in singing our hymn of love to pledge ourselves anew to that cause of greater understanding of who we are and what in us is true. We would be one in living for each other to show to all our community. We would be one in building for tomorrow a nobler world than we have known today. We would be one in searching for that meaning which bends our hearts and points us on our way. As one we pledge ourselves to greater service, with love and justice, strive to make us free.
Thank you again. And now I will extinguish our chalice this morning, which I may not have the words perfect, but we're going to try anyway. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of a community, or the fire of commitment. For these we carry in our hearts until we are together virtually and in person again. May it be so. I end with a benediction from Reverend Kimberly Quinn Johnson. These are her words. We are the ones we have been waiting for. We are not perfect, but we are perfectly fitted for this day. We are not without fault, but we can be honest to face our past as we chart a new future. We are the ones we have been waiting for. May we be bold and courageous to chart a new future. May we have faith in a future that is not known. We are the ones we've been waiting for. There ends our service this morning.